A new study from the Center for Economic and Policy Research by economists Mark Weisbot and Jeffrey Sachs finds that economic sanctions by the Trump administration since August 2017 have caused tens of thousands of deaths inside the country and are rapidly making the humanitarian situation even worse. The sanctions are depriving Venezuelans of life-saving medicines, medical equipment, food, and other essential imports. This is illegal under U.S. and international law and treaties that the U.S. has signed. Congress should move to stop it. Now, here are some of the negative effects that have occurred in the country as a result of U.S. sanctions against them. An estimated more than 40,000 deaths from 2017 to today. The sanctions have reduced the availability of food, medicine, and increased disease and mortality. The August 2017 sanctions contributed to a sharp decline in oil production that caused great harm to the civilian population. The U.S. sanctions implemented since January, if they continue, almost certainly result in tens of thousands of more avoidable deaths. Based on this estimate, 80,000 people with HIV have not had the antiretroviral treatment since 2017, 16,000 people who need dialysis, 16,000 people with cancer, 4 million with diabetes and hypertension, many of whom cannot obtain insulin or cardiovascular medicine. Since the sanctions began in January 2019, oil production has fallen by 431,000 barrels per day, or 36.4%. This will greatly accelerate the humanitarian crisis, but the projected 67% decline in oil production for the year, if the sanctions continue, would cause vastly more loss of human life. This is it. The Trump administration is criminal. This is the deliberate murder of tens of thousands of people by the United States merely because the country nationalized its oil industry. That's what this is about. It has already been admitted by John Bolton on Fox News. He admitted that this was about oil, and I've done a video on that previously. We very clearly see the United States murdering tens of thousands of people for their own oil profits. Every single person who stands up in public and denounces the Maduro government as being some kind of dictatorship or hurting its own people is nothing more than a piece of shit. They're a subhuman piece of fucking shit. We very clearly have the country being killed off. A mass kill-off. This is genocide. Yeah, you can look up the definition of genocide. This is it. The United States is committing a genocide against Venezuela for its own goddamned oil profits. And as we're doing this, where is the UN? The UN is doing nothing. It's sitting there playing with its thumbs. Because the United States basically funds the UN, and if the UN actually stood up to them, they'd cut off the funding. And even then, what would you do to the United States? They are the strongest military power in the entire world. I mean, what can you actually do with them? There's no ruling that would mean anything because there's no way to enforce it. And this is the point that I've been trying to make about imperialism all along. This is why countries who are oppressed by the United States should be oppressed, who are being oppressed by other imperialist powers, need to have a nuclear deterrent. At this point, when your country is being murdered off by a country like the United States, there deserves to be a nuclear retaliation. I know that's something that a lot of people don't want to hear, but what's left? Venezuela is literally starving to death because of these people. They're destroying the entire country. They're killing tens of thousands of people. If that's not a goddamned act of war, what is? I mean, it's right here in front of our faces. It's right here in front of the entire world. And the best anybody can do is send aid. And then the United States offers aid with a bunch of guns and weapons for opposition forces inside, and then Venezuela tells them to get lost because they don't want it. But they accept aid from the UN, they accept it from Russia, China, and plenty of doctors and other supplies from Cuba. But we have this going on, and the UN is doing nothing. Why anybody would even want to be a part of the UN at this point is beyond me. It serves no purpose. It serves no purpose but to enforce imperialist interests. This is why the Democratic People's Republic of Korea has nuclear weapons. Because this This would be done to them right now if they didn't have so much of an ability to fend for themselves. If they didn't have their own production levels up, the whole Juche self-reliance principle. It's a pretty good idea given that this is what happens. This kind of self-reliance is certainly necessary in a world that no longer has a communist superpower. It no longer has a Soviet Union. It doesn't have a China. And regardless of what anybody who thinks China's a socialist country is, or thinks that it's a socialist country, it's doing jack shit. It's sending some aid, but it's not doing anything to end this. They'd be doing a lot more. This is about China making sure that it can get its loans paid back. And it won't get any of its money back if Venezuela eventually falls to U.S. power. They can kiss those loans goodbye. So we just have the reality of the world. Russia doesn't really care. China doesn't really care. All they're trying to do is preserve their own interests. They don't actually give a shit about the Venezuelan people who are suffering. And this is another point that I want to make about another aspect of this. Now, aside from your echo chamber online with all your friends who also support Venezuela being liberated, of course they do. They oppose U.S. imperialism. I'm not saying you don't oppose U.S. imperialism. Of course you do. And your friends do want it, and your online community does. But the other 99% of the U.S. population couldn't give a fuck. Either they don't care or they support it because Trump said that Maduro was a bad guy. Or they're on the Democrat side who support the idea that that Maduro is a bad guy. There is no appealing to the American people. If the American people can stand there while tens of thousands of people are being murdered, and either just, well, I don't really need to pay attention to it because it's not relevant to my life and what I'm going through. Or Maduro's a bad guy, so he should just stop sanctioning his own people. I don't really know how that works in their mind. It would be just for, I think it would be just for nuclear weaponry to be used against the United States at this point. Because what other option do they have? They're going to die. Venezuela is going to die slowly. This is the end game. The United States doesn't need a military intervention inside the country. They don't need to declare war. They can literally starve the country to death and create a humanitarian crisis. Not yet, but can create a humanitarian crisis even worse than what's going on in Haiti. And they'll absolutely get away with it. Because the people of America don't care. Yeah, you and your online friends care. You and your own party care. But the other 99% of the country doesn't care. And what does that matter to the people in Venezuela who are starving? The people who can't get dialysis. They can't get AIDS medication. They can't get medication for cancer. What does that matter to them? It's going to kill them either way. And this is the point that I have tried to make about first worldism and the general state of the proletariat and the so-called proletariat of the world today. None of that matters. None of that bloody well matters. Here's a good comparison. When talking about racism, and then you refer to certain white people that don't see race, or the whole race thing doesn't matter to them, which they can do because they're not being affected by it. It's not hurting them. And they say that such people are still inherently racist because they are going along with the status quo that is racism. I don't disagree with that. That's true. But when we apply that logic, which is perfectly valid, to other situations like this, then we have an entirely different, then it's perceived entirely differently. Oh, well, yeah, but first world people are still proletarians, they're still working class and they didn't do nothing and all kinds of other nonsense. This is the point that I've tried to make. The U.S. empire has to fall. Its own people don't care. They really don't. And there's no appealing to them. You can't appeal to their conscience because they don't care. The same way you can't appeal to those white people who say that they don't see race. or they don't care about racism because it doesn't affect their lives kind of thing. What does that matter to Venezuela? They're still going to die. And if the United States empire was removed from the map, they would be able to trade with other people that the United States is bullying and forcing them to not be able to trade with. So in the end, you tell me what good the U.S. empire is. And even if you're being attacked by someone who doesn't know what they're doing, let's say you work somewhere with people who are mentally infirm for one reason or another, and they attack you. You do have to defend yourself. Them being mentally infirm does not mean you don't need to defend yourself, or you shouldn't defend yourself. You very clearly have to. No one's saying to take it to an extreme, but you do have to defend yourself. And even if the masses of American people don't care, don't want to know what the U.S. is doing to Venezuela, that doesn't mean anything to the people suffering in Venezuela. They have to do whatever it is they need to do to survive. And they have to start thinking about it at this point. What if 40,000 people have died in less than a year because of U.S. actions? Where does it stop? When is the world going to say something? When are all these countries who claim to be humanitarians going to do something about it? And even then, what can they do about it? Because the United States is a hegemonic military empire. That's pretty obvious from anybody who isn't deluding themselves. It's one of those situations where what does Venezuela have to lose at this point? They've already got tens of thousands of people dying. You know, whatever. I've already gone off on enough of a tangent here. I think you get what I'm saying. Something's got to be done here. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.